just saying. The police are up 1-0 as Mike Shields bound down to Harry Nixon. Down got good time. Victoria, Mike Blair, Mike Sager.
Yeah. All the ones in the right spot. Hold on a second, well. Probably a little after the open. Hello, good day, good evening, good morning, wherever part of the world you're tuning in from. Welcome to Ben Almeida Racing. Anyway, today we will talk about spark ignition. What actually happens when we initiate spark in a spark ignited engine, 4-stroke, 2-stroke. But today we will deal with a 4-stroke scenario. And I will try to explain and keep it simple. I don't think this has been shown this way before in detail, and I will showcase what actually happens, the conditions for a good ignition event. And pretty much what we will be looking at is the final details of what entails between an old school minimal swirl or tumble cylinder heads from the 60s, 50s, whatever, as opposed to today's very effective cylinder heads. It enhances the combustion capability of the engine by far, minimizing internal losses, negative torque issues, and I'll try to highlight why that is. Anyway, here's our block to illustrate what's going on with our spark plug video. All right, so that is at 0, and this is at 0 on the crank, and we'll start with that. So let me just make something clear. Sometimes there's a lot of information out here, and I try to be as accurate as I can when I describe certain, mechanical, theoretical events that happens in a 4-stroke engine, or basically what I would say 5-stroke. It's not a 4-stroke, it's an outdated description. This is a 5-stroke engines. Now, I was once racing in the 2-stroke world, and one of the premier engine gurus in that scenario, this is 25, 30 years ago, he talks about his explosive chamber. Now, I don't know what he meant by explosive chamber. As far as I'm concerned, an explosive chamber is an explosion. I don't care what kind of bottom end you have, what kind of rod, piston, block combination, 4-bolt main, 6-bolt main, cross-bolted main, you're not going to contain it. When you say explosive, it's an explosion. It's an instantaneous event, and I don't think you can harness that with any piston rod ring combination, crank. It's just so. First and foremost, when I see these things, the proper descriptive should we say, technical term should be used. It's rapid or fast burn. When people talk about an explosive chamber, that's that's garage world mentality. Okay, we're beyond that. We're trying to elevate this as far as we can go within the confines of what we can show here on the video. And I would like to make that clear. All right, just like when before I saw one guy design an exhaust system on his car, and he was saying that this was the pre-detonation chamber, and some of his friends were very impressed because they didn't understand any better. Pre-detonation chamber, meaning he had some fancy things on his mufflers, and I'm like, oh my god. But anyway, let's just stay away from that, and I'll try to explain everything as clear as possible. Okay, so we start. Let's start, now that you've seen this layout that I have explaining, you know, what we're going to be showing here as far as crank degrees and where the piston is situated inside, you know, the crankcase, what the actual combustion event is taking place, what actually takes place. And it's just not bam and ignition and rapid burn and crank and piston and everything goes down. No. Okay, we will get to the finer details, and we'll talk in crank degrees and where the piston is positioned. This combination is a 4-inch stroke big bore combination, so short rod, this is a fairly long rod, okay, but there are differences when you're running a shorter rod or longer stroke, or long rod, short stroke. But we will try to just explain it today in simple terms. We'll keep, because we'll run out of hours here if I go through a different combination with a long or short rod, short stroke, big, long stroke. We'll keep it to a standard, pretty much square engine. All right, 4-inch stroke with a 4-inch bore, long rod combination, and we'll try to keep it simple. When the spark is initiated, what actually happens is there is a pre-flame condition. It's very hard in a dense atmosphere with compression or with boost or with nitrous. The atmosphere inside the combustion chamber is very, very thick in order to jump the spark. Not like with low compression engines, you can get by with a very wide spark plug gap. Now, the more compression, more boost, more nitrous, the gap becomes even smaller. Before, we used to run 45, 60. Now I ended up 21, 23, okay, 28, in the 20s, just to get the spark to jump across the dense atmosphere inside the chamber. Talking about the dense atmosphere inside the chamber, well, back then when I was running the Grand National versus Mustang series, that's basically the start of the Mustang versus Grand National competition back in the 80s and the 90s, which is the start of the new muscle car revolution, part of the whole deal. I was running a 331 cubic inch nitrous oxide small block Ford, and life was good. We could run with the big boys, but eventually I wanted more challenge, and I called up my mentor Chuck Stevens, and that time I told him, look, I think I want to get out of this boost nitrous world and start with a basic NA. It's more of a challenge for me, plus I get to learn more about the inside of that engine and how to make power in its purest form. And so we proceed. He goes, let's do it. And after I set the first 9 and 10 second runs here on the West Coast in a Mustang 5.0, we proceeded to come up with a Yates small block Ford NA, normally aspirated S, what my goal was. And we ran the Grand National Series, and Mustang versus 5.0 Grand National Series. We qualified. We were the top guys there. it opened a whole new world for me. And one of the first things that I had to deal with was the ignition. I started having issues misfiring when I engaged the transfer brake, and I floored it. It goes, then the RPM picked up to where I had to set the transfer brake. But it really threw my concentration, threw my game in the competition. I was trying to figure it out. People were saying, well, you have too much compression, which was 16.7 at that time. But remember, this is early 90s. They go, yeah, you got too much compression for the amount of gas that we have, or the kind of gasoline. And I kind of like, maybe that's it. But a lot of people gave up. They didn't even try what I was doing. Anyway, eventually I figured it out when I had my crew go up to Brotherhood Raceway without the hood off, or the hood off. I engaged the transfer brake at the start line. They were standing right by the guardrail, and the cap started jumping across. So my miss wasn't an ignition miss per se inside the chamber. It was an ignition miss on the cap. All right, so that's why MSD has the wide cap and the small cap. This was one of my problems. When I lowered down the spark plug gap from, I think, 45 back then, and I was down to the 25, 24 range, that miss went away. Now I can get on the transfer brake without, thinking, is it gonna bog down or die out when I engage the transfer brake. But that was a learning experience which I was glad to have learned. Instead of jumping in and just squeeze the trigger or up the boost, I had to deal with this issue. And here's the cap and arrangement back then. This was the old style cap from Mallory, MSD back in the day. This is what they had. The closed towers. Kind of like it's easier to jump from one spark plug tower to the next. So you can have cross-firing issues. That is a big possibility. And then they went to this. Okay? Wider spacing, there's less chances that there'll be cross-firing to the other tower. This is excellent. This is what is being used today. I don't think you'll see anybody with a Series engine use this kind of cap, except when you get clearance issues with a manifold. And the same thing with the old Ford. They look pretty much alike, don't they? It's just the way you strap it on the distributor. But otherwise, it's basically the same thing. So, be serious, you gotta have this thing, all right? Here's a little write-up by 5.0 magazine, I think is them, where they posted something about what I've been doing back in the 80s, 90s, as far as the 5.0 movement's concerned. Movement's concerned. And then from that point on, I went NA. Since I got that figured out, then I kept my mouth shut. I didn't say anything about running a very, very low spark plug gap because of the, like we said here earlier, the dense atmosphere. The spark couldn't jump across the thick conditions inside the combustion chamber. So it'll jump the wire or it'll jump the cap. The cap was the easiest one to jump across. Okay? And the wide spacing on the caps permitted that or lessened that possibility. What actually happens when the combustion or the spark jumps across that gap? There's a pre-flame condition. Okay? This is not the burn yet. This is a pre-flame condition. It takes between 6 to 8 degrees from the time, let's say, you fire up at 38 degrees. What I'll show here, 38 degrees, there's a 6 to 8 degree, should we say, delay before the actual burn happens. Now, to start off, we talk about the pre-flame condition, which is about showing 40 degrees of total lead ignition lead on old school Ford, small block Ford, Chevys, Mopar, and right there, 0, roughly. Doesn't have to be perfect, but we're just trying to illustrate. Now, talk about old school cylinder heads that required roughly 38 to 40 degrees of total ignition lead. At 40 degrees that you initiate the combustion, the piston is sitting roughly about 600, a little over half an inch from top dead center, or from top travel of the bore. So it's about 600, over half an inch at 40 degrees. At 38, let's see this. At 38, for some of the better ones, it is at 555, about 555. So it went up about 60 thousandths with just roughly 3 more degrees of ignition lead. Now, this being said, we'll talk about the pre-flame condition. If we initiated the combustion chamber or the ignition at 38 degrees total timing, okay, old school engines, 560 from TDC, and the pre-flame condition requires 6 to 8 degrees. Now we'll go 6 degrees from 38 to 32. Okay, now that's 32 degrees from 38 for the pre-flame condition, and the piston went up about 400, 0.400, went up that much. As you notice, at 32 degrees of pre-flame, the quench is not in effect yet. This is what we're looking at. It's not at play as of yet. 32 degrees of pre-flame. It could be less than that if, like I said, that there are advantages in swirl and tumble. This pre-flame might be a little bit quicker because there's good mixing. The molecules are closer or more evenly dispersed, enhancing the combustion process or the initial combustion process. When this spark jumps across the spark plug gap, there is a sphere. A sphere is a round ball of not fire yet, but an ignition source, a pre-flame condition. It lights up right by the gap and starts to expand. It'll take 6 to 8 degrees. Now, this could be minimized by an effective combustion. Well, not yet. Let's not get ahead. This can be minimized by a good cylinder head that has a lot of swirl and tumble. What I'm trying to say is that when it's coming in to the chamber, all right, when it starts to swirl, it has a little swirl pattern. It's a mixing motion. And then when it gets inside the combustion chamber, there's the continuous swirl and perhaps a tumble motion. So you have this and then this inside the combustion chamber. What that does, it enhances and spreads all the fuel and air molecules and orient them to a more favorable molecule. Air and fuel molecules are oriented correctly or close to each other, not far apart, some away from each other. So basically what you're looking at is we try to get a more uniform dispersal of the fuel with air molecules around the combustion chamber. Now with the swirl like this and tumble, this pre-flame condition can be reduced somewhat because the conditions are favorable for this to happen almost instantaneously, or should I say enhanced. I should say instantaneously, because that becomes more of an explosion again. All right, but you're looking at fractions of a second. This happens so quickly. This pre-flame condition is enhanced with sufficient energy and orientation of the air and fuel molecules. It is very important. That means the compression coming in. All right, when you compress the air and fuel molecules, they kind of like get excited, all right, and they kind of spread around more often or more. And when they spread out, there's activity there, and compression will do that. Increases the pressure and temperature sufficient for the air and fuel molecules to orient themselves and enhance this issue or this condition from a pre-flame condition to a flame propagation. Okay, now we're looking at a 38-degree total lead time with the 6 to 8 degrees of pre-burn or pre-flame kernel before the actual burn sequence happens, and the total time for the burn rate to go through in crank degrees is about 25 degrees total. Okay, 350 in the hole, and then now we're gonna move it (25 degrees) of burn angle. So that is the position after the preliminary pre-flame front. 10, 20, 25. There you go. Look at the piston. It's almost at TDC. Roughly about 5 thousandths away from top dead center. And that is the complete flame event. Okay, it's close to the area where quench has an effect, or the combustion chamber has an effect on this position. If given this example of old school V8 engines of 25-degree burn time, but if you have an advanced cylinder head, the burn time usually an old small block Ford or Chevy that's requiring 38, 40 degrees, now suddenly you're down to 34 to 32 degrees. That's quite significant. So when you look at piston travel, you're looking at, let's just say, another 8 degrees of free dwell time, or it doesn't have to come up against that. So we're looking at, right now, 350, 355 actually. And then we go 30, and we end up at 32 degrees. All right. So when I was 350, and what happens is that the piston went up an additional 1, 2, almost 200s. Now 200s from the top of the deck. That's significant. All right. So when I look back and come back to 30, all right. So I will turn it and end up at 32. There you go. That's quite a bit. All right. So that is less expansion force, or that's less expanding gases that the piston and crank and everything has to overwhelm to get up to TDC.
Okay, after the pre-flame condition or the buildup of the flame kernel, we're looking at remaining 30 degrees on the crank. And if you use the 25 degrees of burn time, you go like this. We're at 30 ish. Now from the pre-burn or formation of the flame kernel, here we go, 25 degrees. 10, 20, 25. It's basically there, close to 5 thousandths away from TDC, 5 degrees of crank angle, and we're looking at a pretty good scenario here. And that's considering we're using 38 degrees as the initial layout for this old school engine. Now, let's go back to, let's say, a Yates SB2 Chevy, Mopar small block, NASCAR style, closed chamber scenario. Now, we know for a fact that the Yates SB2 require about 8 degrees less ignition timing or total ignition lead time. So from 30, we take 8 off. We end up with 22. Okay? So now it's 22 degrees. And then now, if we still use the 25 degree burn angle, look what happens. 22, 12, okay, 2, and then plus 5 for 25. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You got till 3 after top center, okay, or after top dead center, that you're got a lot more burn duration as opposed to 5. You're looking at 8 degrees more burn time for this crank. So you're looking at this old school, it's fizzling out. Here it's still burning till you get to about 5 degrees after top dead center. Quite effective. You're pushing down the piston a lot longer, about 5 degrees, considering the fact that you also did not fight it going up with additional timing, and the gases are expanding and you're not fighting that going up. So all in all, the scenario is good. Okay, during the burn sequence, when it's approaching TDC, 2/3 of the fuel is already spent or burnt. That's why it's even more important that if you can have a good control on your quench clearance, be it NA, boosted, or nitrous, your control of this area of the quench clearance or quench pad, that can backfire on you or help you. All right, so that's where we can touch bases on softening the heads or the V-groove application. It's very important. Now, the way you look at it, maximum pressure is achieved between 5 and 10 degrees after top center, this area here. Okay? And now, 15 degrees after top center is when everything has to be done. So you get the advantage of crank angle working for you. Okay, so 15 degrees is where you want to complete the burn sequence. Anytime you're way past that, you're not utilizing your leverage on the crank and the rod and the piston with your burn sequence. Okay, so 5 to 10 degrees maximum, right between here. 15 degrees is going to be done. All right, so when you adjust everything on your burn sequence here, how fast it goes, it plays in as long as you end up somewhere around here. Okay, between 5 and 10. Remember, the old school was just about peaking right about there. And then the modern cell heads peaking right about there. And by the time 2 degrees of closing, flame closing time, you add on to the 103 that we had with the Yates, it is 105. Okay, give or take. Sometimes you can extend that a little bit with little things here and there that you do on the combustion chamber. Of course, timing adjustment, how you play your grid, how you set your total, where you initiate it, it all comes into play. Please subscribe, like, and share.